Hi, I'm Margo Ready, and today we're going to talk about production design on Yellowjackets. In season 3, some of that was also with the DP. In season 3, there was this idea that in the past timeline, we were going to give almost a false, highly stylized sense of security and calm and loveliness in the wilderness. And then, of course, that gets taken away towards the end of the season, and they end up with winter coming back and the prospect of starving again and so on. So with the DP, we discussed warm tones, creating warm tones. The sense of movement was bigger as well in the wilderness and in the past timeline, which is something that they've done in previous seasons. Was very conscious this season to kind of almost spin a false narrative of hope and happiness, which, as great writers do, just takes you further down the pit, literally, and as it were, towards the end of the season. Whereas the modern timeline, with the exception of when people are having transcendent experiences of memories, or we can sometimes go deep into someone's POV, which is often rooted in trauma, then we will sometimes do something a little more stylized in the present timeline, but it tends to sit in a more natural place. A show like Yellowjackets, which has so many genres, as it were, it's a bit horror, it's funny, it's a drama. At the core of it, though, is a constant admiration for realism, that you want to feel like whatever world you're doing is real for itself, even if it's pushing reality a bit. So we will be really careful with research to think about, anytime we do something in the past, we've done classrooms in the past, we even did a kind of fantasy classroom this year. We'll be really careful to try to research that the details are correct for set deck and so on. The Sadecki house, for instance, we'll be really careful that, they have a furniture company, but it's maybe not the most on top of style, and that they don't have tons of money, so that we don't ever want to be that show where everything is just like sort of equivalent or similar. Each thing needs to be the most what it is naturally. It will lean into it. And then when there's a fantasy component, it kind of takes off from there and leans in a different direction. So research. Make sure that everything in the past is really rooted in how it was. That goes for costumes, that goes for furniture. And then in the present day, what is this person like? Like Misty's bedroom. What's she going to have in there? She's got some kind of period things in there because she has a certain kind of traditionalism to the decor of her house. But then also there's some punchy colors. There's lots of plays behind her. She likes musicals, that sort of thing. We have an amazing art department, so we'll have art department people that tend to focus on research. I'll do it myself as well. And then a lot happens in mood boards. In this sort of high-tech day and age, we're all very aware of high-tech and cautious about high-tech. A lot of the initial design and conversations really aren't particularly high-tech. They're literally just mood boards of references and research that you found to discuss to get the correct tone and the correct style. That was, I will say, one of the more exciting and challenging design tasks I've ever encountered and maybe ever will, because it has so many aspects to it. It first of all needs to feel organic, that it grew organically, that they discovered how to build it over time. So it needs to kind of contain a history of its own exploration. So we had kind of, Travis's treehouse, which was in our mind the more initial type of structure, and then they got more sophisticated. It also needed lots of conversations about realism too. I know that it did end up being kind of a fairly sophisticated village in a way, but we had to talk through balancing what could you build, what could athletic, intelligent, capable teens who have some tools, because in the story, some things were saved when the cabin burned, not just the knapsack, but of course there was the meat shack, there was a couple tables outside, they could have grabbed things. So in our mind, to be careful about realism, they had saved a few tools, we've established a few axes and burnt tools around the village site. What could they build? But then also aesthetically to be interesting and have a certain style as well, because from the beginning of the pilot and the pit girl scene, they've developed a culture. They've developed a culture in their clothing, they have torches, they're starting to develop an aesthetic culture. So that was always a discussion. Practicality, what are the materials? Everything had to come from the burnt cabin, the plane, or the nature. How did they make it? So for instance, we were very careful that making the animal pen, which is mostly made out of sticks, that we literally were like, greens department, you got to break the sticks on your knees, and then they're wrapped in airplane wire. And later when we went back to the airplane, we made sure that we had pulled down all the ceiling panels and had lots of wires being pulled out and so on to kind of show the story of that. Designing the village was a really fun conversation to have with the showrunners of how do we infuse everybody's environment with their personality. You know, like Shauna's got some plaid shirts that she's ripped up and tied to do like in her door, and Natalie has some hunting things, and Akila has plants growing. She's planted her hut and she's got a little reading library. And we discussed for fun that Jen's was still being built because Jen and Melissa appeared more attention to them later in the show, right? So we kind of like let that play out as kind of an Easter egg. And Misty's kind of in a loft with some sort of ND people because poor Misty would be. Also into that was a discussion we had where I made a pitch because I enjoyed the little details. I wanted to put a little lending. They're all over my neighborhood. The lending libraries now, and it's part of this sort of greenness and sharing and like nice things happening. And so I was like, you know, Akila, she's likes animals, she's got flowers, like everyone's environment has things representative of their character. What if we had like a little lending library? And it's books people had either rescued from the cabin or had from the plane in their luggage, and they trade. So one of the books we made for there was an architecture book. As someone had a like 11th or 12th grade, fairly serious history of architecture book. And I did, going back to the research, I did a lot of research myself to feel comfortable with this. But some of the most rudimentary buildings people ever made, structures, were just circles of stones or logs, and you just lean a bunch of branches into kind of a triangle shape. Really easy. Like we had greens people who had never done this before, snapping twigs on their knees, making circles and making these huts in like a day. So we convinced ourselves ultimately that this was, you know, they went through sort of they went through a treehouse, an A-frame, which is tie-in bands, you know, and little details from the airplanes and metal and so on those, and then into the circular structures, which we enjoyed because, especially with the yellow filter at the beginning of the season, can look kind of pastoral and welcoming by day, but at night they're actually quite sinister looking and spiky as well. Season 2 was, of course, mostly on stage. We had this amazing challenge of taking the cabin from season 1 and doing a similar, slightly larger one on stage, you know, with sort of film ports, and we built this giant snow landscape and brought in some real trees for realism and snowed it all up. And we did a bit of work outside in season 2, but it is definitely an interesting challenge. I think because it was summer and because we were very lucky with the weather this year, it was warm and nice, but not too warm. I think we decided that it was nicer to be outside. So for everybody. So wherever, we just ended up going outside. And, you know, something I was going to mention is it rained sometimes and the huts weren't completely waterproof. Like we did put little bits of moss, and it was a fun experiment. It's like a petri dish, right? We just built the town, the village, based on what we thought they would know between their book and how they thought. And then we just let it go. And it was just covered. It grew like crazy. There was like 3-foot high grass growing on all the structures. It's amazing how quickly nature comes back. And so it went through time. And so we're like, you know, we'll just be outside. We don't really need to go to stage. Even the pit, we built an actual hole in the ground, which was a big discussion about how brave are we. You know, a lot of times you just sort of build it above ground and fake it. And we're like, yeah, let's just cut the hole. And then we had to build reinforcing walls and put a sump pump in it so it didn't get filled with water. And then if we were filming there was raining, you put protection over top on a crane. But we just went for it. We just let it be an outside show for the season, which was really fun. Obviously, the village was really challenging. The caves were wild too for discussion. But to be honest, for me, the trickiest set to design for the season was the Jolly Hitcher Hotel set, because it's hard to do something that's not meant to be beautiful. It's difficult to do things sometimes that have a very specific cultural niche. So our writers, Ashley and Bart, grew up in New Jersey, and they had some references for sort of like these New Jersey hotels from the 90s and late 90s that were nice, or at least a bit pricey, but also have a kind of like very specific cheesy kind of fustiness to them. So we had to be quite brave. We went with like red curtains and like a lot of red and some wood walls, and looked for yellow wallpaper. I built a big wood headboard because we couldn't find anything that was both like interesting enough and yet kind of slightly off-putting. And of course, Jeff is dying to redecorate it, right? Like he wants to work with the Joels to do many things, including this. So in some ways, just trying to make sure that I found what Ashley and Bart, the space that they were looking for, and they were happy with it, and that it represented the type of hotel from New Jersey.
But me, I'm stuck here in this poorly furnished box sitting on my hands.
One thing that was a happy accident, and it was probably one of my most favorite sets from the season, although maybe from a viewer point of view, one of those things you might not realize how much work into it, was Ben's structure. So Ben is, of course, relegated to the animal pen. I always liked the animal pen. It was like a really nice view of the village. It kind of felt kind of nice in there. So now he's going to get stuck in there, though, and you realize kind of a jail, right? He's kind of going to be chained up with the animals. And there were original conversations of like, what do we do? The team has really quickly made a structure for him. It has to be, he can't really walk, so he's sort of tied up, but he's not about to escape. But we built the structure and we played with it a lot because I didn't want to make just another one of the huts for the village. But at the same time, he sort of needed to have some weather protection. Like they're not totally inhuman. They're trying to keep him alive. So we played a lot with kind of like very rudimentary structures and blankets. And a happy accident I discovered, because I never really made a set out of blankets before, was when you started to wrap it in blankets and get in there with light coming through it. And the blankets are different and tattered, and some have tassels on the bottom and holes in them. This is really beautiful, especially when there's some old kind of autumn leaves in there. And I wasn't expecting Ben's structure to be beautiful, but it's very poignant and beautiful. Like episode 6, where it's mainly filmed in, our DP, very talented Michael Whale, he filmed it beautifully where you get right in it, but then when you start wrapping the blankets around and so on, it's sort of eerie, and it feels like a structure partly made out of their costumes. And when they come in sort of for the first time in season 3 with their kind of season 1 more exaggerated costumes, it all feels one of a piece. So in a funny way, that was kind of an accident. We hadn't gone, oh, we're going to build a structure out of blankets. But then when we started to play with it, we're like, well, this is fun. And it has a kind of slightly Lost Boys feel to it as well. When we did the layout of the village, I was thinking a little bit, making proposals where people live, and I put Lottie kind of at the head of the sundial, because despite all the fights for leadership, and I put Natalie next to her and Shauna, despite all of their fights for leadership, it seems to me that Lottie moves the dial a lot. Like, even if she's not technically the leader, she can just have a vision, or she can get a feeling, or she's really, like, even when they're about to escape, like, she really affects things. So I put her at the head of the sundial, as it were, and she's kind of always watching everybody, you know, like trying to figure out what's going on in her head. So I made this circular window that she had like made out of twigs, which was quite a distinctive visual, sort of tying into between like what's real and what's distinctive. So it's not really foreshadowing, it's kind of reverse foreshadowing. In season 2, in the sharing shack, we also made those circular windows. So it's like you're going into the sharing shack, and you know this inside the sharing shack in season 2, there's almost this like tent like sculpture inside, right? So I was thinking about this, but reverse foreshadowing, that she's taking things that she did in the wilderness and putting them in the sharing shack. Like, you go in this building with round windows and you share in this shape like a tent, but the tent's made of cloth. But really, what does the round window mean? Are you actually private in there? Is it kind of a petri bowl? Is she actually watching you? Is she watching everyone else from in there? So that to me was the biggest kind of signifier between seasons, was this whole thing about Lottie, trying to understand what's inside Lottie, but she's also kind of watching everything else. And to me, that was the most opaque character, to figure out what is she thinking and what's she trying to accomplish.
I will meet you all up at the sharing shack.
No.
Thank you.
I have to say, I'm really proud of the work that the team did in general. It was one of those seasons that you do feel that the aesthetics and the art department is really important to support the season. And what I'm proud of is when I watched it, I really enjoyed being in the wilderness. I felt like, you try to step back and be injected and go, okay, if I wouldn't work on this, what would I think? What would I feel? And I really just enjoyed hanging out in the wilderness. You know, I knew there was a yellow filter, and I knew it was like a little nice, and I knew it was going to fall downhill, but I just enjoyed the feeling, and I believed and felt like I was in a place. So for me, that's what I'm the most proud of, because I think sometimes the best design you're not always thinking about when you're watching a show, you're just in it, and I feel like the team accomplished a lot by making a realistic feeling that you're just in this space. People use it. Travis is jumping down from his treehouse. People are getting books in the background. They're winterizing their huts. Pit felt real. I was really glad we cut it into the ground. So I think that the entire conception of what their life was when they built their beautiful, hopeful place for themselves to survive was very happy with feeling that I enjoyed being there, that it felt like a real place.
Oh, Margo, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I really enjoyed, learning about all the behind the scenes and how things were created. This was great. Thank you so much.
Fun. Yeah, thank you. Great to meet you.